This is a fallacy. You're just pointing back to, well, this thing has a creator, this thing has a creator. We have evidence of those things and their sources. Instead of having a very real, natural medical condition addressed, they were locked up and treated as though they had demonic possession. That's the harm with saying, oh, it must be something supernatural because I don't understand how it could be anything else.
But it is absolutely arrogant and ridiculous and fallacious for you to assume that you were the goal of the universe or a god, and therefore, because the universe suits you so well, it must have been created for you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching. Most of the content on my channel is supported by generous patrons, but made available for free to the entire world. If you support that, please consider adding your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates. This clip, however, is from one of the mini programs that I do on YouTube on The Line. And if you liked it, feel free to visit, like, subscribe, and watch The Line Network live. Thank you. Rich, my apologies for making you wait through a fake call. Rich is a theist is it Massachusetts, I guess, pronouns are him, wants to give a best illustration for the existence of God somewhat intelligently. Well, that would be a huge improvement. Welcome, Rich. How are you?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And I appreciate you condemning that knucklehead, whoever it was, because, you know, you guys are getting some people that act as theists that really have, I just don't know how they have any business even trying to represent the theist viewpoints. But, you know, clearly you're a professional debater, and I'm not going to hold a candle to you when it comes to that. I'm not throwing in the white flag just yet.
I'll just be quiet.
But yeah, I appreciate that. But here's where I'm coming from. So, you know, before we can even get into discussion of Jesus and Christianity and so many other topics, whether these things actually happened or didn't happen, you got to go back to the basics, to the very beginning, which is creation, right? And so, you know, the example that I've heard and that makes the most sense to me when it comes to creation is basically like this type of an example, okay? When you look at a building, okay, and I know you've heard this 100 times, you know that somebody actually built that building. When you look at a painting, that's evidence that that painting was created by an artist, right? And so when we look at, you know, all of creation, the worlds, the planets, the solar system, everything on this planet Earth, and we look at people and we look at animals and everything else, you know, it's hard to say from an atheist point of view that this was all created from nothing, or nobody created everything that we see, right? In my opinion.
Yeah, we don't say that it was created by nothing. But I know artists. I know people that build houses. We have evidence of those things. So that's not a good comparison at all.
Well, so I wasn't done yet. So, the evidence that the world and the planet was created by someone or something or an entity, that's not good evidence?
I haven't heard evidence yet. What are you saying is evidence of that?
Looking around, the fact that we're standing on planet Earth, that we have trees and we have planets and a solar system and a sky.
It's evidence of planets. It's evidence of human beings. I'm waiting for the part where we get to the evidence that there is a creator.
So what other possible solution would you have of something or someone that created all of these things? What other possible evidence would anyone have that it was not made by a creator? That's the point I'm getting at.
There is no evidence that it was made by a creator. So until we know how the universe came to be, then I'm not interested in saying, well, let me just sit here. And to me, it sounds like maybe this is a thing it could be. I need evidence, because then I could just say, oh, I think it was a pink sparkly unicorn that, blew a kiss and it all came to be, because, why not?
Okay, so let's go back a little further in time. For example, the pyramids. When they built the pyramids, did they leave one stone aside and say this was created by, you know, Pharaoh, whatever, and these 620 slaves that created this pyramid? No, they didn't do that. The evidence was that they were in Egypt. They were created by Egyptians, and they were created at some point in time in history, right? The same thing with Hanging Gardens of Babylon or
Rich,
whatever
we're
else it
doing
could
the
be.
same
The
thing.
way
You're doing the same thing already. This is a fallacy. You're just pointing back to, well, this thing has a creator, this thing has a creator. We have evidence of those things and their sources.
and so
See,
Do you
evidence
have
hang
of
on.
those
evidence of
things
any
archaeologically,
supernatural?
right?
Is there any
Ha-
evidence of a supernatural being that created stuff?
Well, the evidence is in the creation itself,
No, Rich,
in my
Rich, Rich,
opinion.
Rich, 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 Rich. You don't get to call something a creation. You have to demonstrate that it is a creation. I will agree with you the universe exists. Whether or not it is a creation or not still remains to be proven. How did you rule out the notion that the universe exists for purely natural reasons, or that with Big Bang cosmology, time begins at the expansion, and prior to that, everything was merely a singularity? So, in order for you to say something is a creation, you have to show that it is. You don't just get to call it a creation and then say it had a creator. Just like if you find paint somewhere, you don't get to call it a painting and say that it had a painter. We recognize design by contrasting it with things that are not designed, things that occur naturally. If you're walking in a creek and you see a bunch of sticks blocking up the creek, you can ask yourself, ooh, did that occur naturally as a result of a flood, or is that something created, like by a beaver? And then you would go out and investigate to see which of those it has the hallmarks of. We have exactly one universe. We have nothing to compare it to. We have no way of traveling back in time. We have no way of investigating prior to the Big Bang. And so you don't get to say this is a creation, therefore it had a creator. You have to demonstrate that it is a creation. And you don't get to say we have to prove it's not a creation, because that's a shifting of the burden of proof.
So you make a great argument, but I have to believe that, you know, when we look at something that was created, right, like a building, like a painting, like a house, whatever the case might be, that is enough evidence to say that somebody built that. You don't need to look up. You don't need to look up paperwork and that sort of stuff, right?
Rich, listen. No, you know that buildings are built by people because all of the evidence for every building is that they are built by people, and there is no evidence of buildings occurring by natural processes that don't involve that. So you have not just that building, you have every other building. You have the process of construction. You have the plans, the blueprints that are on there. You have a fuck ton of evidence that buildings are created and designed and built by people, and you have zero evidence that buildings occur naturally. When it comes to the universe, you have no other universe to compare it to. You have no way of showing whether or not the universe occurred naturally or the universe was constructed. I agree with you that when you look at a building, you know that it had a builder, but not just because you looked at the building. That is what the lie that we tell ourselves by failing to recognize that our brains have accumulated massive evidence. And it's the same thing if somebody says, I just got a pet puppy. We know that puppies exist. We know people keep puppies as pets. It's completely unremarkable if they have a pet puppy. If somebody says, I just got an invisible pet dragon, now you don't have supporting evidence. So their claim alone is not enough. For the universe, you do not get to say it is analogous to a building until you have 50,000 universes that you can compare and show which of them were created and which of them occurred naturally.
Yeah, you can only turn to whatever sort of evidence. And I see your point. And there will be, I don't know that even in the next 2,000 years or 5,000 years that anyone is going to be able to produce
Then why
hard
do you
evidence
believe before?
of the
Then why do you
existence of
believe
God.
before the evidence warrants it? You shouldn't believe something until the evidence warrants it. And if you're saying we might not know for thousands of years, then you shouldn't reach a conclusion for thousands of years.
Yeah. So, absent God coming again, which which many theists believe he did in Jesus Christ and had witnesses and so forth and so on,
God,
that
it's
God came
exhausting.
again, right? So,
No,
absent
no.
of that evidence,
No, but
Go
Rich,
ahead.
there's
absent of
things,
that evidence,
there's,
there's nothing that we can attribute to God. There's no
Tough.
way.
I'm muting you, Rich. You're not listening and you're not thinking. And Promise has something to say.
Rich, here's the problem. There's so many natural things that we have in the past because we didn't have enough information and we decided we really needed an answer. Some of us would make up answers. So with like thunder and lightning, we would attribute that to gods and say it was gods doing them because we didn't understand how lightning worked. We would do this about diseases. I believe it was epilepsy. People up until recently believed that was demonic possession, which that means a lot of people were harmed because instead of having a very real natural medical condition addressed, they were locked up and treated as though they had demonic possession. That's the harm with saying, oh, it must be something supernatural because I don't understand how it could be anything else. That's very arrogant of us. And then we don't get to actually figure out what the real natural cause is.
Yeah, it's a very strong argument that I don't know that any apologist, any Christian apologist, any theist could ever have enough evidence to sway a theist. And I understand your point. So why believe it unless you have absolute concrete hard evidence and proof? I understand your point. And you can't do that, without some bit of credibility and faith, right? The two have to go together.
Rich. You got almost there, and then you started making excuses. You said, "Oh, I understand that you shouldn't believe without good evidence, but you can take it on faith." No, faith is the excuse people give for believing things when they don't have a good reason. Is there any position, right or wrong, that someone couldn't believe and justify by saying it's a faith-based position?
Scientifically and evidence alone, absolutely not. There has to be, you have to have a certain amount of faith with whatever evidence.
No, I'm sorry, Rich, you're not even fucking listening. Is there any position? Could someone say white people are better than black people? That is my faith-based position.
No.
You're so full of shit. Of course they could. Of course they could. I didn't say it made it true. You have to, Rich, you have to listen and think, and you're not. Anybody could believe anything based on faith, correct?
Sure.
That means that faith is not a reliable path to truth or reliability, correct?
Yes.
If faith is not a reliable path to truth, then when we talk about what is the explanation for the existence of the universe, people should not be appealing to faith because that does not lead reliably to a correct answer, right?
Agreed. There's no one who's going to win an argument.
Then this isn't about winning an argument, Rich. Please get that out of your head and listen. You've already lost the argument, and so has every theist that's come before you. I'm trying to get you to stop thinking about it in terms of argument. I'm trying to get you to think about it in terms of, do I have good reason to believe it's true? And so the question is, if we set aside your faith, which we already know isn't a good reason, do you have some other good reason to believe that there is a God that made the universe?
My good reason is probably not good enough for you because it's in reverse Rich, in the evidence.
Rich, it is shocking. It's actually not shocking because I've done this for 20 years to watch your brain do the gymnastics that you're doing right now. The question was, do you have a good reason? That's a yes or no question, which you can then follow up with what the good reason is. And then we can discuss whether or not I agree that it's a good reason. I'm willing to bet beforehand that you don't have a reason that I will find good. And I'm willing to bet a sizable amount of money that I can explain what's wrong with your reasoning, just as I've done every other time you've engaged in fallacious reasoning. So all I need to know is, what do you think is a good reason that is not faith-based to believe that there is a being that created the universe?
I can't believe that creation was not made by an intelligent creator. That everything
Why
that we
not?
see around us,
Why can't you believe that, Rich? What is making you unable to believe anything other than that?
because everything is just too perfect to be left up to chance, and to say that no one created everything that we know and see. It had to be an intelligent, hyper intelligent, in my opinion, and though in the opinion of many others, it had to be a hyper intelligent being that created all of this. Everything, the mechanics of the way everything aligns perfectly, just seems to point to a creator.
So. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's my evidence. That's enough. That's enough for me, but it may not be enough for everyone.
That's not evidence. That's your perception of the universe. But tell me why there are so many things with our body. Why is when I'm drinking or breathing or eating, why is there a large chance that I can choke and die? That wasn't very intelligent at all. Also, why did this God decide it's so inefficient? Why do I have to stop and eat a certain amount of times a day and get a certain amount of nutrition? Like, why didn't he make us self-sustaining? Why am I gonna die if I go drink ocean water? There's so many things right off the top of my head I can think of that are not intelligent at all. And if I were designing the latest model of humans, there's a ton of things I would change that would already just make more sense.
The other thing is, when you say your good reason is that you can't believe that creation was not made by an intelligent creator. Well, first of all, you haven't proven or demonstrated, and you don't have any reason to believe that it is a creation. But the fact that you personally can't believe something is not a good reason to believe something else. That is literally the fallacy of an argument from personal incredulity. So you have a fallacious argument. And then when you talk about how everything's designed perfectly, Douglas Adams has a great little analogy about a puddle of water that finds itself there. But we are the sort of thing that evolved given this universe. If the universe had been different, something else may have evolved. Maybe nothing would have evolved. Maybe something with different intelligence, maybe whatever. But it is absolutely arrogant and ridiculous and fallacious for you to assume that you were the goal of the universe or a God, and therefore, because the universe suits you so well, it must have been created for you. When the non-arrogant thing is to understand the science of the diversity of life that shows we are all, in fact, related, and that we are what can evolve under these circumstances, and to stop thinking that you're special, when in fact you are another flawed-thinking, fallacious being that presumes God must have made it all for you. I just can't believe it was chance. Well, tough. That ain't evidence. That's not a reason. It is a parade of fallacies that is rooted in your arrogance and ignorance.
Rich, also, I'd like to point out that I think you are capable of that sort of thought, because so you said the reason is because you think the universe is what, complex and perfect and well designed. Would you say that God, the creator, if there was a God, the creator, was perfect and complex and all of those same things?
I would.
Great, but you're comfortable without attributing a creator to that God. You're okay with that. You're all right to sit back and say, oh, he always was, or whatever it is that you believe about God. So you're perfectly capable of sitting back and letting something that you perceive as complex and perfect and all of that exist without a creator. You are capable of that.
a creator of God himself?
Correct.
Or stop
You
him
What
believe that
Thomas
this.
just said is,
Yeah.
you said you can't believe the universe exists without a creator because it's so complex. And then you said God is more complex, but you're happy to believe that God wasn't created, which means you can believe that something that complex wasn't created. That is, unless I have missed it, that is Promise's argument.
That's 100% correct.
Hmm. It's a good argument. And I can't respond to that. I can tell you just what was,
Well,
what I came in here with my position of what I felt was sufficient evidence to me.
well, then
And
go
it
off
may
and
not
think
be
about it.
Yeah,
sufficient evidence to everyone, obviously.
but I think, right, Rich, I think you're
Shouldn't be
approaching
for
this
anyone.
from the wrong angle. I don't think this should be about. Oh, sorry, Matt, you were cutting out on my end, so I don't know what you were saying. But
Oh, no,
Rich,
go ahead, finish.
I think that you should go back and think if you care that what you believe is true or not. That should be what you care about, not about having a good argument to respond to Matt and I, because Matt and I aren't sitting here like, well, let me make the very best argument for atheists. We are able to just sit here and be honest in our answers and in our conversation back and forth. Yes, we're hoping to communicate well, but this isn't about like, oh, we're going to win an argument. So I think you should sit with
Well,
that, think about some of these things that we've brought up, and think about if you care if what you believe is really true or not, and if you have good reasons. And I
well,
understand that currently you think that you have good reasons, but you shouldn't have good arguments. That shouldn't be your goal. You should have good reasons.
Yeah, one thing real quick. In addition to what Promise was asking you to do, which is to ask yourself if you care whether or not your beliefs are true, you should ask whether or not you care more about whether they're true or whether or not they're comforting. But the other aspect of this is, you made something that said, oh, those are my reasons. They may not be good enough for everybody. Here's an important question. If something is true, shouldn't the good reasons to believe it be the same for everybody?
wow. If something is true, then yes. If something is true, then yes, everyone should be able to see that truth and believe it the same way. You're right.
And so take that into consideration when you ask yourself, do you care about whether it's true? And do you have good reasons? If you keep coming up with reasons that you recognize aren't good enough for other people, wouldn't that suggest that suggests one of two things? Either you are accepting things for bad reasons, or the other people are unwilling to accept good reasons. Either of those could be the case. And if you recognize that there are people that these aren't going to be good enough reasons for, then there's reasons why we have standards of evidence. There's reasons why courtrooms have standards of evidence. There's reason why science has standards of evidence. And it's so that we can eliminate our personal biases as best as possible. And so if you are accepting evidence that other people find weak, you got to figure out whether or not that's because it's your personal bias, which, by the way, the second you said, I can't believe that creation wasn't created by a creator, you are exposing your bias. I can't believe that it was, but I'm not incapable of believing that it was. If someone were to demonstrate that it was, I would accept it. But the burden of proof is on the people who are claiming it was created by a creator.
You made great points. And I'm sorry that I called in when you were on the show, Matt, because I'd probably rather take my medicine from poison and from promising someone else. But
Okay.
I'll leave it there. Thank you for enlightening me and giving me a little bit more to think about. I appreciate that. I appreciate that you're doing it in good faith, and I hope that you know that my intentions were also in good faith and not trolling or anything else.
Yeah, no, we're good, Rich. I just,
Enjoyed the conversation.
You are not thinking about things as clearly as you might suspect. And it's easier for me to see that, having seen it hundreds of times before. And that's why I maybe know some of the questions to ask. But if it turns out, Rich, that you have good reasons and we've overlooked them, and you have reasons that anybody should reasonably accept, definitely call back and present them, because I'd like to know if I'm wrong. And if you learn something else or come up with a different way to phrase stuff that you think might be a good reason, I'm happy to know that too.
Thank you both. Appreciate you having me on.
Yep. Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, Rich.
We
If
got
Rich
a
is
bunch
still
of.
listening, we're constantly looking for theist callers over on Chewed Gum. We don't get enough of those, and you're welcome to call back over there if you want to think about some of the stuff we talked about, and you have more questions or another argument to bring up. Would love to have you call over there.